guest started out as an idea until their AI-generated video of the popular All In podcast went viral multiple times on Twitter or X, reaching well over 500,000 people. Today, they have an AI-driven podcast creation platform which allows creators and publishers to use state-of-the-art AI hosts to build content. We'll get into the details and examine whether automating the entire podcasting process can dramatically boost your B2B marketing strategy and drive predictable revenue growth. But first, hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast, brought to you by Sproutword.com. I'm Vinay Koshy and our guest is Edward Brower. Edward, you founded your first software company back in 2004 before getting your undergraduate degree in biology. You then in 2009, I believe, started a medical app development company and later on became CTO for the Toronto Heart Centre in 2010. Today, of course, you're building a podcast AI with your co-founder. I'm curious, it seems to me to be quite a deviation from medical apps and all things medical to getting involved in the podcast space. Why? What was the reason for creating podcast AI to what it is today?
First of all, pleasure to be on the show. But yeah, I was interested in first going into medicine. I ended up working with at the age of 16, I ended up working with my grandfather's cardiologist and realizing that medicine was not what I was interested in so much directly, but more software. And yeah, just went into was always doing websites and web apps, iOS apps, Mac apps, Windows apps. We went into medical software. I partnered up actually with my grandfather's cardiologist. And we ran that company for over a decade, developing software guidelines in medicine. But then in 2019, with my co-founder, Sean Duncombe, we founded our first startup. And Podcast AI, we started it in 2023. And it's been about a little over a year now since we started. And it's incredible what we've accomplished in a little over a year.
So what was the interest in podcasting in the first place?
So our first startup in 2019 was around video, and video essentially was very similar. We ended up for a lot of customers running their shows, doing the production for their podcasts. And we just hired actually our CTO, Greg Perkins. He's someone I've been podcasting with for over a decade. It's a very obscure show. I inched myself into it just by wanting to participate. And so anyways, we've always been interested in podcasting really. And with what's been happening with AI, it was the perfect moment.
And I'd love to explore podcast AI and all the details there, including your growth journey. But given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
I think bringing together a lot of different disciplines, being able to handle, because if you're running a company, any startup, you really have to be able to bite on anything, take on any task. At the start, you're starting with all the tasks are on you. Now you and your co-founder, so you got to find somebody who's very complementary. And we just hired, in the last 2 months, our CTO, Greg. We hired a head of engineering for Apple platforms. So John's also the name of my co-founder, who's our COO. We just hired our chief marketing officer, Michelle Tamler. As we're growing, I'm passing on these hats, these responsibilities. But to get started, you really have to be able to at least start everything. And so I'd say that's a pretty important strength.
In that area of strength, what would you say something that businesses don't know? But
it depends what kind of business, or if you're just starting out, you have to prove out what you're doing and get your first sales, and you have to quote unquote get your hands dirty doing the sales yourself. You're going to be the first person doing the sales. You have to get everything started. What life cycle stage businesses are you thinking of particularly?
Let's say seed through to Series C in that space.
Oh yeah. So yeah, if you're in startup line, there's a lot of information out there that I wish was more available when we started, doing the startup thing back in 2019. I think now people have more of a sense of what's required to do a startup. We went through Jason Calacanis's launch program. So he has launch, and in it he has Founder University and he has the Launch Accelerator. So Founder University is pretty useful for us in terms of having that first bookmark in check that we got when they just saw like our product velocity and everything. They take these small bets on companies and they keep an eye on them. Then we got invited into the accelerator. And I would say, and they teach you how to pitch and everything. But I think a really important thing for it, and this is more towards companies that want to do a seed, it's possible that you find the perfect investor that just on the basis of the thesis alone is going to invest. That's theoretically possible. But the truth is, to get started, unless you're a known quantity, you're pre-qualified, let's say in the Silicon Valley, you're X whatever at Facebook. Okay. Unless that's the case, you really need to start focusing on ARR before you start talking to investors. There's no sense. There is this idea that, oh, you should constantly be talking to investors and stuff. But the truth is, yeah, you can talk to them, but you should probably be focusing your time on ARR, getting like product that people want and getting ARR going. And then the conversation with investors is much less theoretical, and they have a sense of growth and an interest in making a deal happen. So for companies that are earlier stage, I think that's the most important thing, actually. Because I just see a lot of companies, they're telling you about how many investors they're meeting, but it's like, why?
You raise a very interesting point there. I'd love to explore that as well. From your perspective, how would you describe podcast AI from the idea that you first started out with as compared to what it is today?
Yeah, so when we started, the way we started was I did a parody of the All In podcast. It got retweeted. It went super viral. I think the first one of them, there were 6 in total. One of them, the first one I remember had 600,000 views. The rest of them pretty good too. And so that was interesting. And then people, so it was the voices of the people on this podcast, and people were asking, is this real? Is it really an AI podcast? The idea was that the 4 stars of All In are reborn as AIs. And people are asking, what's the GitHub repo? Is this real? Can we have it? And that's when we got the idea for Podcast AI. We bought podcastai.com. And the idea was to be able to recreate that, essentially a fully synthetic podcast. But on the way to doing that, there was a product to build. In theory, if you were recreating podcast hosts as AIs, they would have all their memories from past episodes. So how do we do that? Well, we transcribe all the episodes. And before you know it, it's, we could build a SaaS platform actually that can have all your transcripts and build a website from it. So we actually got Jason Calacanis as our investor. So he's one of the 4 on All In, but also using us for thisweekinstartups.com. So this website we generated for him. So that was a compelling product just in itself, because he had long given up. He has about at this point almost 2,000 episodes, going way back to 2008. And so there's a lot there. It was unindexed. He didn't have a website set up. It was too complicated. So we automated that. And then we realized YouTubers would be able to use these websites as well and use our system to generate chapters and all the metadata and all the post-production that goes with podcasting. And then we had YouTubers saying, hey, I'd love to have a podcast, but I just don't have time to deal with that on top of YouTube. And we said, okay, we can just generate the feed. So basically the whole production platform. And then we started doing viral clip generation and the social posts and scheduling them to all the social platforms. And so we ended up building this, what we call now like our producer SaaS platform. If you're a podcast producer, you upload your episode to Podcast AI, and it does all your post-production, does all your promotion, all the viral clips and everything. It does your distribution because it hosts the feed, and it also does this website for you. So that's our production platform. But then, this is a few months ago, we started looping back to the original idea. Can we actually, so this is all great, but can we on top of that generate entire podcasts? And we released this about a month ago, and we just branded it to MagicPod. And MagicPod is pretty interesting because you set up your show just like you're setting up a podcast. You set yourself up as the host. You upload your voice. It has your bio and everything. And then you say, okay, here are my sources. So your source can be, it could be a personal blog, your personal blog. If you're a company, it could be your corporate blog, or it could be news websites. They have RSS feeds, topics that are interesting, or you can do a custom RSS feed and just control the docket that way. So you could use WordPress or RSS.app, or there's a few ways to have a custom feed. Anyways, you select your source for the MagicPod, and then you set the schedule. So, every morning at 8 a.m., I want a MagicPod generated. And so your MagicPod will start automatically generating an entire podcast in your voice. There's music mixing in at the start, music mixing out at the end. It's going through the different topics that come from your sources. It's your voice, and it's you basically performing a podcast completely automatically. And MagicPod will actually chain automatically all those post-production steps. So generating chapters, titles, descriptions, key points, generating that website, putting it out to Apple and Spotify. All of that is automatically chained. So it's the world's first 100% automated, fully produced podcast. We call it MagicPod.
So let me make sure I understand this correctly. At the moment, assuming that we have people listening who aren't using podcast AI, there are a suite of tools like Script, for example, that I could essentially take a recording, upload it, it does transcripts. You could manually go in and pull out clips, etc. You would need to do a little bit of manual uploading to your podcast host, etc. And then if you want to create a show notes, etc., you need to upload all that to the website in particular. Are you saying that all this is done through podcast AI as opposed to having to use different tools and platforms?
Yeah, we replace all these tools. So we even generate the clips. Right. So, if there's the two of us right now in the pod, it will generate those viral moments with interesting parts. It'll do the karaoke style text on top and those vertical videos, do the copy. So let's say you want to schedule that automatically to LinkedIn. It'll do all of that today, right now.
Sorry. So I'm certainly aware of tools like Opus, for example, that will identify particular clips. It'll give you a bit of a blurb. Are you saying that it will actually generate the accompanying post for a link to the video?
Yeah, it'll do the post in that really cool, like Alex Ramosi style. It'll do the tweet thread. It'll do a TikTok, more like a question rather than long. It'll do Instagram. It'll do YouTube Shorts. It will do all the social media copy. And yeah, we replace a whole bunch of tools. And on top of that, we have these really unique features that were really important for our agency customers. For example, we have this adaptive mode where your titles and descriptions will actually be based on the style of your previous titles and descriptions. So people are used to seeing like, oh, this is obviously an AI generated description or title. Ours actually adapts to your fine-tuned as you correct your titles and descriptions. And so it takes you much closer to that theoretical 100% mark where you actually don't even need to change anything. The AI just gets it on the first shot. To start, our goal is to get to 80%. I think they passed that now on the generations there. And so that's just the adaptive mode. Another really cool thing, we have enriched transcripts. So every transcripting piece of software right now that's modern is using a technology called Whisper that was developed by Google. And Whisper, depending on the person's accent and depending on how many company names and proper names and things like that, it'll be like 90 to 95% correct. How does it know how many H's are in John? It can't. Unless your company name is Google, it doesn't know how to spell your company name, that kind of thing, which is pretty obvious. And sometimes they'll have mistakes as well. And we actually have enriched transcripts, which means we can actually take the transcripts using a set of different models. We take these transcripts to 99% corrected based on the context, meaning the names of your hosts and everything. And then the context of what show you're on. So fully corrected. So we get the transcripts to 99%, which was a requirement for our agency customers. And if you look at podcast AI versus the sets of different tools you can use in aggregate to recreate what podcast AI does, from a technology point of view, we're like the F-22, right? We're like the best hardware, best equipment you can buy.
And with the clips that your platform generates, one of the issues I've found with most of these platforms that do select clips for you that are AI driven to a point is that they aren't very good at necessarily picking out the best clips or viral clips, depending on what you want to call it. How does your platform fare in comparison? Because I would imagine your agency clients wouldn't want to waste too much time in trying to fine tune the best clips, etc.
Yeah. So for agency clients, so Opus is 100% focused on clipping, right? And they're not focused necessarily just on podcasting, but it's an obvious application for clipping. And so they go more into, they have B-roll, they have actually features we don't have, like B-roll and more customization. In terms of the things it finds, Arch does a bit of a better job right now, but the version 2 that we're going to be launching is going to be much better. Like how our transcript enrichment and our adaptive mode are the next generation of how these LLMs work. So we'll be a generation ahead, essentially, in a month, based on what we have right now. And it's interesting that they tend to just scan the transcript and they try to do a bit too much work in one pass. We're better at doing multiple passes, and you'll see this in the next generation product. But for agencies, frankly, agencies can't use, for the most part. If we're talking high-end agencies, they actually will not use the final product of any of these tools, right? It's fully custom. And so we just, for those customers, we give them the timestamps. And so they will sometimes use our viral moments as storyboard. Or if they were using Opus, they would actually be using Opus as storyboard as a first pass. And then there's part of the bell curve where they actually are using the output. And so our goal is to have that output be as good as possible. And for podcasting, I would say we're pretty close to beating out Opus for podcasting.
Okay.
People have to remember, Opus is actually, their ambition is to do this for all of video. So a bit of a different angle there.
And I'm assuming that, as with most platforms, you still have the opportunity to go in and manually select bits that you would want to add or tweak a selection, maybe 10 seconds this way or that way. Is that correct?
So we don't have that yet.
Okay.
So we have a different philosophy here, which is, if you think of what is the Apple philosophy is, create a product that will be good for 95% of the users and just make it a magical experience, for lack of a better term. Because Opus is 100% focused on clipping, they can go in and create a whole UI and make it so you can manually tweak these and everything. Same thing for Descript, manually tweaking the transcript. And so one of the differences between us and Descript is, with our enriched transcripts, we have the transcripts at 99% plus, whereas Descript will give you this very sophisticated editor to tweak your transcripts. So we just try to make it work. So the ideal product for us just works. I think we'll have that customization in the future, but it's not the immediate objective. We just want something that works.
This next iteration that you mentioned, when is it due out?
So we're about a month off. And what it's going to be doing is actually performing the work in multiple passes and having what we call kebabbing, which is stitching together bits that work as a complete narrative to just create way more enticing viral moments, because you'll very often have sequences that might be interesting, but they're sprawled out over too long a period.
Right.
And so that can't be a good viral moment. But if we were automatically kebabbing it, that's much better, obviously. And also having better hooks. There's ways that what we have is actually going to make that an order of magnitude better in terms of the final output.
All of this sounds great. And I understand that you're trying to take away a lot of the pain in production and creation. Where does this leave creators, though? And I'm trying to understand your thinking here as you develop your platform, because they're going back to, say, pre-podcast AI, there was certainly a bit of a learning curve in terms of creating a podcast and getting it out there into the public sphere, getting traction, etc., and making it, monetizing it, or certainly being able to leverage it for business purposes. Having lowered the bar in terms of learning curve and production abilities, how do you see this as being a go-to medium or a medium in the overall marketing sphere for most B2B companies?
Yeah, so if you think that for B2B companies, your first motion on sales is open a HubSpot account. Your first motion on marketing should be starting a podcast. And Podcast AI is the platform to do that. And because it's the best way to talk with customers, get yourself in front of customers. And we've made that as easy as possible for people that want to do a one-on-one interview show, for lead generation, getting yourself out there, meeting customers, talking to customers, being part of the conversation. And we really think in terms of this concept of increasing your surface area as a company. What is marketing about? It's you want to have some organic leads coming in, obviously, and but you also want people to know about your brand and to hear about you.
Mhm.
And so it's such an integral part. So if you just think of a regular production platform, it lets you do all that stuff as a one person shop. Let's say you're just starting, you're the one wearing all the hats as the CEO, maybe, or you and your co-founder. It really lets you produce a whole show at a fraction of the cost it would take, a fraction of the time it would take before podcast AI. And we even have this new MagicPod where, guess what? If you're already doing a corporate blog, we can flip a switch, and that is now a podcast.
Mhm.
And it's funny, our MagicPod customers, they ask us when we're done the onboarding, okay, so what do I have to do now? Assume they have to do something. And the answer is no, just keep blogging. They're on WordPress or whatever the CMS is. Just keep doing what you were doing, medium.com. Just keep doing what you were doing. This is now automatic. You don't have to spend the time on it. And finally, because MagicPod is part of the production platform, you have that website. And by the way, we generate the artwork for the episodes. Like, it's really nice. And we template in the logo and the episode number and everything. Because that's all automatic, just think of the SEO value of the show website with all the transcripts now being automatically generated and associated with your domain name. It really is going to be, is now step one of marketing. Start up your podcast.
Right. Interesting point there with the website. So let's assume you're a company, you've got an existing website and a blog. Could the podcast show notes and posts be generated on that same website?
100%. What we do is we generate this full website automatically. So for example, thisweekinservice.com is automatically generated through our system. You see it in the domain name, that's their domain name. So you can have a custom domain name. If you have an existing company website, you can use podcast.yourcompanywebsite.com. And what happens is, because we use the same navigation structure in the side links as your main website, from the point of view of Google, we can see that, okay, it's a subdomain, has the same navigation structure, this is the same website. And so the contribution in SEO value from the show website and all those show notes and everything automatically produced, that contributes to your main website. So it is a super valuable resource. And people don't realize, but think of what kind of budget you're already spending on SEO. Just divert a little bit of that to this, and you've got a magnification effect.
Certainly. And talked about a podcast with something like 2,000 episodes. Assuming that we've got existing podcasts like myself with a backlog of podcasts, are you suggesting that all of those past podcasts could essentially be imported into podcast AI to generate all the collateral that you've been talking about?
Exactly. So we do that during the onboarding. We import your entire podcast, no problem. It's very white glove service. We get everybody set up, and it's a really seamless experience, actually.
So with MagicPod, you've certainly talked about repurposing existing content. Is there a use case for, say, a new angle, perhaps more of a sales focus for a particular company, creating content around queries that perhaps come through to customer success, customer service, sales queries, and trying to create content around that to reduce some of the repetitiveness of these queries?
Yeah,
What would you?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a customer, Iman. She does music mixing for high-end stars that you've heard on the radio. And she started taking transcripts of her past lectures or demos that she gives to people, and using those transcripts with an intro paragraph in WordPress. So she makes the posts.
Mm-hmm.
The WordPress is a source for the MagicPod, and basically she controls the MagicPod through her WordPress. She posts what she wants an episode to cover, and the episode gets produced the next day. It's really, again, raising that word, it's a magic experience where she's controlling the show without ever having to get behind a mic. You can imagine for your company, just like you set up a WordPress site, WordPress.com, set up a WordPress site and give access to all the interested people in your company. Let's say the tech group, a customer success group, sales, and anybody can just do a post, and we can have them as hosts in our system with their voices. And so everybody in the company could be participating in this kind of free for all where you're creating this resource that way. And so we're seeing more and more creative ways to actually use this, because the ways you can use this are endless.
Very interesting. Again, a couple more features I'd like to pick on or have you elaborate on: ad generator and the AI chat feature.
Yeah. So the ad generation, it was one of the first things we did that was going towards our goal of the original vision of creating synthetic content. And it's very simple. It lets you put in the sponsor name, a very basic sort of CTA, call to action, or pitch, like maybe 1 or 2 lines. And then you select one of the hosts who has their voice in our system, and you say, I want 2 minutes. It will ad lib an entire 2-minute ad read for you. It knows what your show is, so it has all that context. It'll generate that in the voice of one of your hosts. And you have the MP3 now, and you can insert that into your show. And so we have companies that are using it for prototyping ads. We have companies that are actually using it live as ads. And we spoke to one agency recently, and they were telling us about how they have this evergreen content, these podcasts. And for some of these podcasts, they're old enough, this is in music, that the original hosts are no longer available, or maybe they're actually no longer living. And with this, they're actually able to create ad reads. And the reason is obviously an ad read in the voice of the host is way more valuable than some generic ad. And so, yeah, it's a super interesting technology, obviously. And it was our first sort of shot at that. Now, the second interesting thing is, because we have these host profiles, the voices and everything, and we have all the past transcripts, we actually are able to offer an AI chat with the hosts on any episode. So on our show website that Podcast AI generates, you can click AI chat. You can ask anything about the episodes. We have schools that are using it now. So Atlantic College in the UK, they're using it actually to let their students, the episodes are lectures, and they're letting the students ask. It's like unlimited TA resources, right? You can ask anything about the content. We have in medicine, we have people using it as well. Actually, there's a paper done on this using our system. And what they found was that medical residents were basically writing questions. They were getting the hosts in the AI chat to write questions based on the content. And medical residents essentially couldn't distinguish between questions written by other residents and the AI hosts. And it was like 52 versus 55% hit rate. And the AI hosts were able to answer questions 97% correctly. And the residents were at 92%. So very interesting, right? Because when you have these AI hosts that have access to all that content, that essentially is memories, all those past transcripts, it becomes a very powerful thing. And it can respond in the voice of the host that it is representing.
Right. Very interesting features there. So given the way things are moving and the fact that pretty much every company is now essentially forced to become a media company and to certainly incorporate technology like AI into how we message and connect with, as well as target your potential audience, where would you say that most companies need to invest their time and energy in order to gain traction?
Yeah. So I'll just use it as an example, VC. So it sometimes doesn't feel like this to founders, but capital is actually very plentiful and available. And before you're raising, it seems like the hardest thing in the world, but once you're doing it, it's actually not difficult at all. It's the easiest part, which is this very frustrating thing to understand from the other side. But so if you look at it from the perspective of VCs, where there's unlimited amounts of capital available, how do they distinguish themselves? And the answer is they're doing media. So there's all these VC podcasts, and some of them are all in, and This Week in Startups are top podcasts, but also A16Z has a podcast, Sequoia has a podcast, Crucible Moments, they're all doing that. And so it is critical for them to establish their brand and to distinguish themselves out there in the marketplace. And that affects all kinds of businesses. Brand is becoming the distinguishing factor for a lot of businesses where you might be offering something that's not that different than the competition, but then who's going to win? It's who has the most brand recognition. If you look at just ChatGPT, so ChatGPT was, it actually wasn't a technological innovation. It was more like a realization. The actual GPT model had existed for a year, I think. It was a realization that it's just auto-completing one word at a time. So if you start the sentence with, you are an AI agent tasked with helping a human, here's their first question, it'll auto-complete that story. And also if you say, by the way, here's the conversation so far, it'll take that into account. It's auto-completion. So ChatGPT was just this realization. But once you realize that, ChatGPT is just a weekend project. And so why is ChatGPT the most well-known product in that field? Because they were first. And by being first, you get network effects, and that's basically the only kind of moat you can have right now. You talk to VCs and like, what's your moat? It's become a stupid question. Like IP used to be a thing. There are sometimes some regulation moats, but very often your moat is just speed to market, and it just becomes part of your brand.
Given where you're at today, how are you building out your brand and related moat as a result?
Yeah, so we're going really focused on podcasting. So if you look at companies like Riverside, they're not just for podcasting. Descript is obviously not just for podcasting. Opus Clip is not just for podcasting. What we do is we're doing this horizontal platform that does everything, but focused on podcasting. All the solutions are focused towards that application and make one coherent workflow for podcast AI. And so we just make podcasting effortless. We automate your podcast. And that is either you have a real podcast that you're doing, or you can now have this MagicPod that is completely automated for you. And so nobody but us can actually offer an experience like that, because we're actually, in a sense, vertical in podcasting. But if you look at everything that goes into podcasting, we're very horizontal. And so we not only, just to give you like more of the strategy, we not only have this producer platform, which is now the best experience you can have in terms of production platforms. We're also developing a consumer app. So Podcast AI as a podcast player, which normally is not something you could try to do because there's serious network effects that would prevent you from doing a podcast player. But we're actually focused on an audio interface where you could essentially ask any question about a podcast, or say, give me the 1 minute summary. And if a podcast is actually a customer of Podcast AI on the production platform, you'll get that 1 minute summary in the voice and first person perspective of the actual host of the podcast. And so you can start imagining the kind of experiences. And also the person that we have as our lead engineer on Apple platform, Sean Allen, he has experience building with Vision Pro. And so you can start imagining what we can do. Essentially, I think a big part of the future of podcasting is going to be akin to the Star Trek holodeck. And I won't elaborate too much on that, but if you know what that is, you get where we're going with this. And then finally, to two more things on this, we're going a bit into hardware. We're actually going to be building out a microphone that's going to be superior to a Shure SM7B in every way. And we'll be announcing more details on that later. But also we own podroll.com, which is so it's a joint venture now between Podcast AI and Jason Calacanis, who's one of the four again on All In, which is the #1 tech podcast in the US. And Podroll is going to be twice yearly. The first one, we're going to make the announcement pretty shortly, but it's going to be soon, probably in the fall. And so we're going to be putting on an actual convention for podcasting. We're going very deep on podcasting, and very wide in terms of really being the company in podcasting. And then even on technology, like nobody has something like MagicPod. Nobody has that adaptive mode. Nobody has those enriched transcripts. We're really the ones that care about the tech on podcasting itself.
Okay. I certainly look forward to a lot of those developments that you've suggested, including things like the microphone. I'm sure it'll be interesting times. Edwin, thank you for sharing your thoughts on all of this. Given all that's happening, both from an AI standpoint as well as in the podcasting space, do you feel that there are perhaps an aspect or two that doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
An aspect of podcasting?
And bringing AI into the whole experience.
People sometimes ask about Is there a problem with all this AI content? What's going to happen with regular content? What's going to happen with the market? People are very worried about that. What I tend to tell them is that you've actually seen versions of this before. What's going to matter is provenance. So for example, let's bring up Star Trek again. There's endless amounts of, fan fiction for Star Trek, right? But most people don't know about that stuff. All they care about is what did Paramount put out. That's the official canonical Star Trek content. And so if you think back, if a celebrity you follow puts out a statement, guess what? Their PR person wrote that, not the celebrity itself. But you give it the same value because, okay, it went through the official channel. This has the sanction of the actual artist or celebrity behind it. Content is going to be seen very much the same way with AI and podcasting. You're going to have the ability to have endless content, fake episodes of this or whatever. You can just generate them at some point. In fact, one of the things we're working on right now is, because we're generating audio content, including the MagicPods, we're going to be able to take an image of someone's face and drive it with the audio so that even the MagicPod is going to be able to have viral moments in full video. So very interesting things coming. And you can see how, okay, it looks like we're going to get a content overflow, but there's going to be a premium on provenance, things going through the official or authorized sources. And so that's usually the response to people that are worried about, especially that. It used to be that when CG special effects came out, it's like, oh, those aren't real. I don't want to see a fake content. Guess what? Every movie you see now, like, you're not seeing real explosions, and nobody cares.
Yeah, true. Again, thank you for those insights. Edward, to wrap up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Top takeaway for people that are doing B2B, get yourself out there, increase your surface area. Obviously, I think podcasting is an obvious way to do this. We have tools now if you want to do recorded podcasts, we have the tools now to make this as easy as it's ever been. It is really just you do the recording, we do the rest. So that is unbelievably easy. If you don't even want to do that, if you already have a corporate blog with MagicPod, that is done. So the technology now is such that there is no reason not to be in the game, and having that surface area for your company, for your content, for you, for your brand. I would say that's the key takeaway. Get in the game.
Right. And for those who are interested, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Check us out at podcastai.com. They can book a demo there. And our team comes on and guides you through the whole thing. It's very fast. And that's it.
Okay. We'll include a link to that. LinkedIn, is that the best place to connect with you personally?
Oh, yeah. Personally on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Edward Brower. I'm also on Twitter. You can send me a DM. Okay. Edward Brower.
Okay. We'll include that as well. Edward, thank you. This has been very enlightening and insightful.
My pleasure.